Welcome, thrill seekers, to Paranormal M, your gateway to the bizarre and inexplicable. Subscribe, hit the like button, and enable notifications so you can join us on our quest for the truth behind the unknown. Prepare to be captivated by our latest mind-bending tales. The hot, fiery breath of death. Alright everyone, in today's episode of Keeping Up with the Ghosts in My House, I'm going to tell you all about Harold. Harold was the man who built the house back in 1900, and was also the undertaker. Spooky, right? Well, anyway, Harold was pretty notorious for being a mixture between what we would call a Chad and a Kyle. A true nice guy. A Chile. Or a Cad. Harold had a wife named Francine who got fed up with his Chad-like behavior. She had an affair with the funeral director who lived in the other building next to the house, which is my house. When Harold found out, he pushed her down the stairs. She broke her neck. She was sadly pregnant too. This will be important to remember for a different story. Later that year, Harold was poisoned. He also died inside the house. He's been an asshole ever since. Now, when me and my family moved in, everything seemed pretty peachy. Except, of course, for the occasional bump in the night. Well, after 8-ish months of living there, I was sleeping upstairs in my little brother and sister's room. The bed in the red room was pushed up against the corner of the north-facing wall and into the east wall. I was laying down on my left side facing the east wall. My back was to the crawl space that we had in the room. Well, at around 2 a.m. I woke up completely unable to move. I freaked out. I had never experienced sleep paralysis before. I could only move my head. The only light source I had was from the street light outside my window. I looked around, panicking. Then I realized something. I heard a man talking to me. The air in the room was very chilly, and mind you, this was August in Wisconsin, so our house was normally warmer and humid inside. Mandy hated using the air conditioner to keep the windows open instead, so for me, being cold was out of the ordinary. As I realized I heard a low voice, it suddenly got louder and closer to me. I could not make out what he was saying. It was like trying to listen to a conversation through an air vent, or through a heavily insulated wall. Then I felt it. I felt hot breath on my neck and ear, like someone was whispering a secret into it. He whispered to me for what seemed like hours, when in reality it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. When I figured out what was going on, I shut my eyes and said the Lord's Prayer. Now, I'm not one to pray, but I was so scared. After I said the prayer, the light lightened up, or the air lightened up, and the atmosphere in the room changed. I was able to shake the rest of my body awake. I checked the time on my tablet, 2:47 a.m. After I could move my limbs, I whipped around to face the crawlspace. We had a sheet covering the entrance as a makeshift door, and my sister Chloe was absolutely terrified of, what was inside of it. The sheet had been moving as if somebody was walking through it. I heard a creaking noise outside the bedroom door, which was open near the end of the bed. I never slept with it closed. Fuck that. And when I looked over at the door, I saw a shadow creep around the corner and disappear into my other sister's room. They weren't in it, thankfully, as I know my 7-year-old sister Kaylee would have flipped out. The next morning I told my dad what happened. Whatever, he doesn't want to admit something. You usually get all quiet and act like you're not there. He left for work without saying a word. I asked Mandy why he acted like that, and she told me that a few weeks ago when they were laying in bed, my dad woke up with sleep paralysis. He lays on his back when he sleeps. So I'm sure you can imagine his horror when he realized that he could only move his head. She said that he saw a black shadow standing at the foot of their bed. Mandy was asleep, didn't wake up during this, so this is what Dad told her. He said that the shadow was whispering to him something that he couldn't quite make out. Then when our dog Basil woke up and started growling and barking, the shadow disappeared out of the room and went back upstairs. A chill raced down my spine, and it never happened to me again. Although my sister Kaylee once described a man with a handlebar mustache and spectacles, congruent with Harold's tire, sitting in the chair in the corner of her room, which is also the room that the hoodoo/voodoo guy did not want to be in. The boy with the red eyes. So my mom grew up in a place called Echo Lake. She lived right on the lake in a relatively new house. She said it was built in the 60s and she lived there from 1990 to 94. Nothing tragic or unfortunate had happened in the house, to her knowledge, but still some creepy things went on. My mom, her sister Beth, and her brother Ben all had separate rooms. Through by 1994, they were all sharing one bedroom as they didn't want to be alone. So to get into the story, my mom had a closet in her room. There was a regular closet with a regular door, except the door never wanted to stay closed. It would always open by itself, no matter what you did to it. She even went so far as to have her dad change the doorknob on it. Well, one night the door kept opening as per usual. She had a big oak desk in her bedroom, so she decided to push the desk in front of the closet door to keep it closed. After she did this, the door handle started rattling, and the door started to forcibly push the desk forward and away. My mother obviously freaked out. I was frozen on her bed watching in horror as a small boy with red eyes appeared from the closet. She said that he sat down on her desk and just stared at her watching. She finally had gotten the courage to call for her dad. He came into her room. When he opened her bedroom door, the boy disappeared, and Papa, her dad, looked all over the room, as my mom was just visibly shook because she thought that somebody had broken into their house. Papa couldn't find anyone in there. But as he walked back to his room, my mom said that she saw the boy go into Ben's room. And that's when Ben woke up and started to cry. By then, the whole house was awake. Ben described to Papa and my mom what had happened. He said, "I saw a little boy with red eyes come in my bedroom. He sat down on my bed and just stared at me." That was the last time that they saw the boy. But one time my Aunt Beth was having a sleepover in the house, and my aunt said that the girl had started screaming when she was changing in her room. She said she had also seen a little boy and that he had smiled at her. Beth said that the girl was so freaked out afterwards that she called her parents to come pick her up. The lock. It was the first week of July. I was home in Wisconsin visiting my family. I asked my stepmom, Mandy, if I could take the car into East Troy to go get coffee with my best friend. In my hometown, we have a town square. My house was pretty much directly across the street from East Troy House, in case you were wondering. You can probably just Google it if you're having trouble picturing it. Anyways, Victoria, my friend, and I went to Square Roots Coffee. While we were there, we started reminiscing about old times in my house. She kind of got this giddy look on her face and said, "Hey, you know nobody lives there, right? It's vacant. And it has been since you moved out. We should go check it out." When she said this, I smiled and agreed, but my heart started pounding. Just mentioning the house sent some otherworldly kind of fear into my bones. We downed the rest of our coffee, walked the whole 2 minutes it took to get to Roots to my house. We stepped into the yard, under the old birch tree. My legs began to shake. Victoria is not fearless, but she also didn't realize the danger that we were in just being there. That was why she was acting so normal, and not shaking with fear like me. "I think the lockbox for the key might still be under the porch. I don't know if they changed it," I said, as I got down on the ground to look for it. I tried the code, it didn't open, so I knew they hadn't changed the lock. They must have. Victoria and I started walking toward the side door of the garage. It was left cracked open, and at this point, I was basically Eminem, knees weak, palms sweaty. I felt like I was about to, mom spaghetti all over the place, and we stepped inside the garage, and when we did, we heard a slight tapping, like someone was taking their nail and flicking the wood. I dismissed it as rodents or some small animal, and that's when we heard it, a scream. Except it wasn't loud. It sounded like it was muffled by many doors and materials. It was very faint. Victoria looked at me then, mouth agape, fear in her eyes. Though for some reason when I heard it, the fear left me and I switched from being scared to being calm. I knew he was there. Harold knew we were there. We were not happy about it. Victoria, I'd like you to get off the property. Harold is vicious. I don't want you hurt. When I said this, the door leading to the dining room started shaking. Something was pounding on it from the inside. Tori ran outside and down the corner to where the cobblestone bar is. Calmly, I looked at the door and said, Harold, I know that you know I'm here, and you're still not welcome here. Get out. After a few moments, the pounding ceased, and instead started again in Logan's old room above the garage. I sighed. I knew that we weren't getting into the house without being attacked by that angry spirit. When I exited the garage, I waved Victoria down, and she came back. I want to peek in the windows and see if he damaged anything, I said to Victoria. We walked out front to the bay window and looked inside. All the lights were on. The fans were set to their highest setting, but the house was totally empty. I didn't realize the pounding stopped. As I skimmed over the living room and dining room, my eyes rested upon the dining room door. The hook lock that we had installed was sitting perfectly still. As soon as I took note of that, I started swinging back and forth like somebody had brushed against it or perhaps even flicked it with their finger. I was filled with dread then. Let's go now. Go, move, I ordered. We booked it back to square roots and ordered more coffee. I couldn't speak or move, and I was just filled with this dread, and it lasted all day till I went home. Victoria said she wasn't nearly as frightened as I was. The fear left her when we ran back to the roots. Can anyone explain what this might have been? When I was a little kid, maybe 7 or 8, I was running out the front door when I heard my grandma's voice call out clearly and angrily, "Jordan, come here." I was really confused, so I went back inside and looked upstairs for her. Oh, and downstairs, she wasn't there. I looked in the garden out back and by the linen hangers in the side yard, and I couldn't find her. Turns out she was at my neighbor's house getting a basket of seasonal fruit from him. I asked her if she'd called me in the house just now, and she said no. She's been at Pete's the whole time. Later in the day, she left me and my older brother home alone while she ran some errands, and he and I were outside playing catch in the front yard. When we went inside, my room was completely turned upside down. Only my room, though. My drawers were open and all my clothes were tossed about. My closet doors were open and the contents of my closet were strewn all over the floor. My bedding was yanked off the bed and my little TV was on, but only static was playing. On my bed was a cup of water sitting perfectly upright and centered. I called my grandma thinking somebody broke in, but wondering why it was only in my room and they'd looked around in. Anyways, she came home, helped me clean up, and reassured me that everything was fine. That evening, my brother and I were playing in our grandma's webcam since it has funny filters on it. One of them turned the saturation on high and the shadows were very prominent. My brother was acting out some Star Wars and disappeared into the shadows. As he did that, another shadow ran across the hall and into my room. He watched the video back and told me to come look. Needless to say, I was very freaked out, and that's all I can remember from that when I was a kid. But I still think about it a lot, and I wonder what it might have been. So, if anybody has any thoughts on this, they would be greatly appreciated. I feel like I'm being targeted. I'm going to start this off by explaining my workplace and how it operates. It's important to understand for context. I work Graves as a psychiatric facility that holds a number of residents. Our facility was built over 5 years ago, and we've never had a death on the property or even a close call. This is because things are organized extremely well at my workplace, with us being well-staffed and well-equipped for our jobs. With Graves, we have one person in each area of the house, and we do randomized checks on our residents every 5 to 7 minutes. Our facility is split into 2 separate buildings. The first building at the top of the hill is the main building, which houses most of the residents. The second building at the bottom of the hill operates mostly as an admin building, but the basement level houses the lowest intensity residents who are close to completing their treatment. All in all, the entire facility is split into 6 zones, with 1 to 4 being the main house, 5 being the annex area attached to the main house, and 6 being the basement of the admin building. We have 1 person in each zone, with a supervisor, a med tech, and a float, mainly hanging out the top floor of the main house unless somebody needs their help or wants a break. All in all, things operate extremely well at work, so when something doesn't go right, we all know. Everyone at my work has had these encounters with the spirits who are haunting our facility. It's so commonplace at this point that it's treated like it's normal to experience things like this. But my experience has been a lot more extreme than my coworkers, starting to feel like I'm being targeted. I tend to get sent to Zone 6 a lot because I can manage well on my own and I don't scare easily. Out of all of the areas on the property, Zone 6 and the admin building in particular is extremely active. My coworkers are afraid to come down here because it means hearing footsteps and banging coming from the empty floors above, as well as feeling like this constant feeling of being watched. Whenever I come down here, things go further. I'll have doors randomly opening and closing, lights turning off and on behind locked doors, and I'll get the sensation of somebody staring at me to the point I'm near tears due to genuine fear from the intensity of the hostility aimed toward me. I often feel sick as soon as I enter the area, just overwhelmingly lightheaded and nauseous. I've honestly almost fainted while being in there. I'll feel something touching me sometimes, well, like tonight. I felt a tug on the hood of my jacket. I feel like whatever it is that's haunting this area is targeting me specifically, and it's genuinely terrifying. Black Stickman Phenomenon Encounter Scotland, UK. My family and friends don't believe me, so I thought I'd post my story here with all you open-minded folk. Here's a little bit about the area it happened in. I live just off the Isle of Skye in Scotland. In the village where I live, there's 2 bridges linking the mainland to Skye. It has a lighthouse and 2 cottages on a wee island between them going through back hundreds of years. There's a lot of folklore around the lighthouse. Everybody who's worked there over the centuries has always said the same story, which is that they heard loud voices calling outside the building and a massive change in atmosphere. But none of the workers who stayed there from countries all over the world could ever identify or understand what the language was, nor did they see who or what was calling it out. Regardless, I don't know if my experience is linked to this, but it happened in the exact same area, which makes my story all the more creepy in my opinion. The encounter. One night I was running the Skye Bridge after work at around 9 p.m. I stopped to take rest at the first bridge between the cottages and the mainland. The bridges were in complete darkness, and I was using my torch to see where I was going. I leaned on the barrier to catch my breath, looking out over the moonlit loch. When I turned my head and looked back into the streetlights about 100 meters away or so, I was immediately stunned. The hair stood up all over me. My nerves were shot to pieces, and I was overwhelmed with shock. I watched what seemed to be a 20-foot giant blurry stick figure crossing the road. It had no features other than see-through shades of blue and black. Its legs and arms were the same long, thin shape of its body. It was as if it was a tall, featureless head. All were squared off. The scariest part of the encounter was the way it crossed the road from right to left in the street light. It took long, smooth, slow strides, didn't seem to make contact with the ground. It glided with its steps. When it reached the other side of the stone wall, it vanished, then instantly reappeared in the same spot, proceeded to cross the road again. It did this over and over until it never reappeared. It was the creepiest thing I've ever seen, and it's hard to explain it, but it scared me. Since that day, I'm very nervous about going there. It's always in the back of my mind. If anybody on here has had a similar experience, please contact me. I've never shared it because I thought everybody would think I was nuts. I didn't even know that this was a phenomenon until I started researching it. My findings creep me out further due to how similar other people's encounters have been. Growing up haunted. I grew up in a different home located in the suburbs of Atlanta. A few different homes. I'd always seen things and believed in spirits since I can remember, as most children do. When I was 4 or 5 years old, I had started telling my parents of things that were happening and things that scared me. When I was 7, I saw my first full-body apparition. My mom had told me to go to bed because I had to be up early for school, and I snuck my binder with me upstairs to my bedroom so I could continue writing in it and keep it a secret from my mom. Once I got sleepy and closed my binder, I turned over to get some sleep. While I was turning over, there it was, a woman with dark hair dressed in a white nightgown standing in front of my open bedroom door. I thought it had been my mom. I called out Mom several times, and she stared out blinking directly into my eyes. The stare felt so deep and unhuman, I began to question everything that was happening. I looked down at her feet. They weren't there. Everything faded away past the ankles. That's when I knew that this wasn't my mom and it was something else. It scared the fuck out of me. I pulled my blanket over my head, told myself that it can't see me. And if it can't see me, then it can't hurt me. I felt it hovering over my back as I laid there in a fetal position with the blankets covering me, just staring at me with that intense glare over my back. From then on, I heard and seen spirits ever since. Once we moved, it got worse, and they interacted with me more. They would move objects and break things. Pictures would randomly fly off the bookshelf. Light fixtures would randomly crash to the floor. Until I was 17, moved out of my family home. My parents and younger brother never had these same experiences and wouldn't be home when they happened to me. Till I moved out. That's when it happened for them as well. The Pioneer Family. This has been through my entire life. I don't know why I'm only one that really sees them, but I'll give you some background information. I live in upstate New York in a very old town caught fully on fire. The house that I live at is one of them back in the 1900s. My grandpa rebuilt the house, but very old land anyway when I was younger, but it had an imaginary friend. My mom said that I called it a ghost. I had a rough home life. And, well, I don't remember anything about my childhood, so I recently asked her about it. Her name is either Buffy or Betsy. It was a while ago, so my mom or me doesn't remember, but my grandma was the first to notice. Me and her were in the laundry room. I was playing on the floor, having full conversations with someone who my grandma just asked me who I was talking to. I said a ghost. She obviously didn't believe me because I was 3 or something like that. She asked if I was okay and where it was. I said it was right behind you. She left the room immediately, my mom said. But when I asked her what to do, or what would I do with her, she said Buffy protected me. She said that she would sing me to sleep and talk to me. She lived behind the TV. I then asked why don't I see her anymore? She said that Betsy had gotten mean. One day I ran up to my room saying that she slapped me. She told me the stuff people say on ghost shows, that you're not welcome here, you have no power and all that. I guess after that I stopped seeing her. So why did I ask my mom about her, you might ask? It wasn't to remember it. It was to ask what she was wearing since I was 13 till now. I've been seeing things only about 5 times, but they weirdly stuck with me one night. I was half asleep, kind of awake, and turned around to see 2 kids, an older girl and a younger boy standing together. The girl had a bonnet and a dress, the boy had overalls. My mental wasn't good, so I went straight back to bed thinking that it was something I saw. I was so tired when I was 15 moving my table out of the way to put my AC in. My friend was in the room. I moved the table away from the window, and my friend was pushing it to the side, but she kept pushing it and it was holding it from going to the wall, and I turned around to tell her to stop. She was across the room looking in the mirror. I screamed because how could you not? I still can't explain because I was pulling the table and it was still pushing away, but the next year we put up ACs. I was in the backyard and my cousin who lives here was putting up my grandpa's, which faces my backyard, told me to go get my mom to help because it was heavy, so I went inside immediately. My mom was at the door and I told her to go help C. In quotes, my cousin. She was like the opposite of herself. She said she already told them no to helping and walked upstairs, so I was mad because I did it for no reason and ran to my backyard. Nice, that's the first period right there. Tell me when I get there. My mom was already going back there, helping them, so it's not possible. I told my mom immediately what happened, and she said it wasn't her. She didn't talk to me, but she was wearing the same exact thing as my mom. I really can't explain this, because I've never had a new experience like this, only one. Period. I have no clue what this is, but I was getting changed in front of my boyfriend on FT, and he saw a white face in the corner of the screen, smiling. He said my name, so when I looked at the phone and saw it, I slammed. It backed down. This hasn't ever happened again. But it really freaked me out, and I don't know what it is still. When I was on FT with my boyfriend just a couple of months ago, a baby doll for a split second ran across the bottom of my TV, floating and moving like somebody was playing with it. From the spot I saw the children on the other side of the TV, and it disappeared, but it had a bonnet on, and wearing a dress. This is what made me want to place everything together. When I asked my mom what Buffy was wearing, she said a bonnet and a dress, and I never told her about any of the recent shit I've seen, but I don't remember Buffy, so it all kind of clicked. Period. I've always been scared of the dark, and especially underneath my bed. Well, this is the reason why I'm writing this, because I can't explain it, and I want people to know I was drunk and plurging on my phone, and I felt this old cold rubber hand. It grabbed mine. My friend was over, so I wasn't looking because it's between my bed and the wall, and it was implanting in my brain. I don't know if she remembers because we were drunk by the day after, and I saged my room. I bought it. To this day, I was drunk because my bedroom always gives me this feeling. It was always cold in here, and I needed that bad energy out. Nothing else has happened. And get this, it ends with a comma. No disrespect, but you might be drunk while writing this. I have no idea what any of that was. If anybody understood that, please translate it for me. Thank you. Crazy encounter with Alamo ghost. When I was around 10 or so, 2019, I went to the Crockett Hotel in the middle of San Antonio. This sounds like a fake story, but bear with me. I was laying in the tiny mattress the hotel had with my mom or dad. I forgot. The mattresses are very uncomfortable, and well, the room was really dark. The only illumination in the room was the lights from the city flashing through the windows, which wasn't very bright. Everyone in the room was asleep except me, because my parents didn't tell us it was haunted. But I knew because I'm a big ghost enthusiast. I was still a kid, so I was scared shitless, staring at the lit wall, attempting to actually close my eyes and sleep. That was until I heard a gurgling sound. Not like a mouthwash gurgling, like you have blood in your lungs and throat type of gurgling. This gurgling was on and off for about 30 minutes. Nobody in the room was snoring. It was like 3:45 when I checked my Star Wars light-up watch. The gurgling sound wouldn't last for more than 3 minutes until it stopped. After like 3 more rounds of that sound, I started to see some kind of smoky figure in the corner next to the door. I couldn't make it out because it was too dark to see it. I believe what I saw that night, or early morning, was one of Travis Soldiers choking on his own blood. That last story has my mouth full of spaghetti. I thought I was hallucinating all of the smoke, but it's vivid now that I'm thinking back to it. I woke up the next morning feeling sick to my stomach. This was one of the scariest experiences I ever had. If you like paranormal activity, I highly recommend staying a night there. My friend and I were driving in a pitch-black park, saw a poodle walking on 2 legs, and it walked off. One evening, back when I was a senior in high school, I was hanging out with my friend. I picked him up from his house, and we drove to the outskirts of town to get away from all the noise and talk about life. We knew of this park that at a certain hour would turn off all the lights, leaving this giant park instead of lakes just completely pitch black. That night we went there. As we were driving to the park, circling the perimeter, which is about 3 miles, we had our headlights on, only seeing a few feet ahead in the pitch black night. At once we halted to a stop. Seeing something out of the corner of my eye become my center of the vision so quickly left me stunned. We were stopped by a white poodle. It was walking on its hind legs. Its bipedal motion wasn't inexperienced either. Its level of stillness and intention in its step was paralyzing. As we came to a stop in the car, I was walking across the road on 2 legs. In the middle of the road it stopped, it turned, looked at us with its beady black eyes and kind of turned its head like dogs typically do when they're puzzled, but then walked off across the road into the darkness again. We drove out of there as quickly as possible. I like that one. L'homme à suite rouge. Hello. For a little context, I'm a 14-year-old, and during the story, I was 12 or 13. I was in 6, 5, or 4 in middle school. You should know that I'm uncomfortable in public, so I have difficulty making friends. And in 6th grade, I was with my friends, but not in 5th grade, so I spent a whole year alone. It all started in half of 6th grade. My grandmother died, but it strangely didn't impact me because I had no contact with her. And after that, I got a cut on my arm, and at that moment, my ruler in the middle of my desk slipped onto the floor. That was while the window was closed. I don't pay attention to it. Then I moved to 5th grade since I no longer had any friends. They put the degree sign after the number 5, so I don't know if he moved to 5 degrees or 5th grade. I don't know what's going on. Well, then I moved to 5th grade since I no longer had any friends, and it was difficult for me, and my mental state got worse and worse. One Monday evening, my mother told me that a loved one had left. This hurt me enormously, and even today I've mourned her loss. I cut my arms and legs. That same evening, I leaned out the window and I saw a man with a red hoodie and black pants in the middle of my street. It's a small village where I knew everybody, and, well, nobody stood still in the road full at night. And that evening, he terrified me. Since then, I saw him everywhere. He was trying to attract me with him, which obviously scared me, and I saw many other things. Like a woman in black observing me. I also heard things like whispers, footsteps, or even in the evenings I was crying because of a story at school. I heard a woman cry, which it grew louder in my ears to the point that I didn't even realize I was screaming for it to stop. Otherwise, objects that move, this man who touched me once or who observed. I moved and did my 4th grade very far away, but it was even harder mentally. Everything stayed there, which suited me perfectly. Then one day in class, I saw the man in red behind my teacher again. At times, I think about it and I see it again, but it terrorizes me. I see more when I have anxiety attacks. Paranormal, or criminal. To give some backstory, I live in a very safe suburb in Ontario. Several weeks ago, I heard banging on the side of the house, which I thought was strange but didn't give it much thought. However, I couldn't help but think that somebody's trying to get my attention or get me to go outside to investigate or something. Anyway, I just let it go and I went on with my life, thinking it might have been an animal. It may have happened on more than one night, but I honestly don't remember. Flash forward to last night. At 1 a.m. I start hearing whistling outside the side of my house where my bedroom is. I'm on the second floor. It wasn't a song or anything, but I also wasn't, having constant repetition. So I knew it wasn't a machine or something. It was like somebody was whistling every 5 to 15 seconds in varying short durations. It went on for maybe 20 minutes before I finally opened my bedroom window to get a better listen. When I opened the window, the whistling stopped for maybe a minute. Then the whistling happened like 3 more times, and then I heard a meow. But it wasn't a cat. It sounded like a man imitating a cat. Sounds like me. They meowed a few more times and went back to whistling. It felt like somebody was trying to get my attention. I was so sure it was a ghost that I just closed the window and went to sleep. It was also less scary if this was a ghost than if it were a real man. In the morning, after giving it some more thought, I'm terrified that this might be an actual man trying to kill someone or something. Something. But it was honestly so odd that in the moment I thought there was no way that this was a living person doing this. It had to be a ghost. Which is why I didn't really wake my parents to go check it out. I told my mom and boyfriend about it the next day. They said to call the police the next time I hear it. So what do you guys think? Was it a ghost or some creepy man trying to get someone or my attention? Probably somebody trying to get your attention. Ask Reddit. After I graduated high school the summer before college, I got into a huge fight with my parents over signing student loan paperwork. They refused to sign anything, and that's a whole other story. I packed my shit and I moved out. Fortunately, my boyfriend's parents let me stay with them. I grew up in Rhode Island, and lots of houses there are extremely old. My boyfriend's house had been built in the 1700s. It was part of a farm that had a lot of outbuildings, and it had 6 gravestones in the back. The guy who owned the house before them was a miser who was robbed and murdered in the house. He was left for dead on the kitchen floor and wasn't found for days. If you went into the basement, you could see where his blood had soaked into the floorboards above. Everyone in the house had seen something ghost-like at some point. The mom would see a man in a beekeeper suit come up the stairs at night, sit at the foot of her bed and stare at her. My boyfriend once also saw the figure of a woman digging through the hay in the loft in the barn. When she realizes that he was watching, she stopped digging and turned around. She had no head. And to be honest, I thought they were just teasing me with these stories. I wasn't a big believer, but the stories were weirdly specific and obviously always stuck with me. The house had 2 parts, the original built in the 1700s part and an addition that they'd built in the 1980s. I stayed in the addition. It had a living room, 2 bedrooms, and a very small bonus area. I lived there about 10 months total, and I made myself at home. I would often work out on the elliptical. One day my mom came home with a very old charcoal drawing that she got from her mother's house. It was in a frame with glass over top. It was a drawing of a very creepy-looking little girl. I hated it. She hung it in the elliptical room. I could feel the creepy kid's eyes burn into the back of my head every time I used the machine. She gives me the shivers. One winter night, my boyfriend's sister and I decided to be silly, have a sleepover like little kids in the living room. When I woke up in the morning, I found a flower on my pillow next to my head. It was ripped right out of the ground. It still had dirt in the roots, but it was the dead of winter and there's no snow outside. Or rather, there was snow outside. The mom was really into plants, so I looked up the flower in one of her books. It was a forget-me-not. No one could figure out where it came from. Later that day, I went to work out on the elliptical. When I flicked on the light and looked up, I saw it. The picture of the little girl was still in the frame behind the glass, but there were 4 claw marks cutting her right across her face. Tearing the paper, it was ruined. Forget me not. Forget me not. Ask Reddit. A few years back, I purchased a bankrupt house for me. After purchasing, I decided to paint all the walls and renovate some interior by myself. So my dad and brother went to Home Depot. I was scrapping some of the old poster glue and some posters left on the first floor girl's room. Actually, the person's living room before and left some of the clothes and some toys in that room, so personally cleaned everything from there. We decided to purchase and leave paint there and just leave. All the work we were going to do the next day. Back to the story. Yeah, I was doing some minor works and alone in the home, and suddenly the sound of crying baby starts from our home. I looked around and I felt like it was coming from the basement. I was alone and we only had one central light working in the basement, and I remember. Although I went down to the last step, I checked, no one there, but I still hearing sound of crying baby. I stepped out of home and was sitting outside the house on curb. After 10 to 15 minutes, my dad and brother came up and I told everything to them. He said we need to look into it. We all together went inside home, but sound was not coming. I said it was coming from basement. We all went to basement, but that time there was complete silence. We stayed almost an hour, but no sound. We headed to our old home where we was living. Next day, we woke up early. We needed to start paint work, decided to do 2 rooms by evening. We started our work, and around noon that sound started again. It was literally sound of baby crying, and luckily we're all there. My dad said we need to check from where it's coming. We all went down the basement and checked. It was coming from the storeroom door. I was so scared, but I've dad so not much. We walked toward the storeroom and looked inside. It was dark. Sound stopped, but still we was looking inside from where it's coming from. There was small panels missing on the wall at the bottom of the storeroom, almost 2 or 3 feet. We checked inside. It was like a small tunnel, and it was turning after 4 or 5 feet. My father asked my brother to go inside and check if everything was there. But he was scared, so he asked me. I went crawling inside. I decided to go backwards after the turn. I turned and I crawled about 2 feet in, and suddenly it started sound again. Literally, I shit out myself. And I just crawled outside as fast as possible, like I was gonna die. I came out and literally shaking, but my dad was there, so it helps me out. After a few minutes, sound stopped. My father said somebody has to go and check what is there. He can't fit inside or else he will go. He asked me to go again. I went again, and I took a torch with me. As I went on a turn, I checked with torch. There was a baby doll, battery-powered, in there. Probably later on we assumed it came down while previous owner daughter throw it an air ventilator or wall duct. Slipped back all the way there. Ask Reddit. When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through very rural and almost abandoned parts of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I see someone on the side of the road flagging me down. Up in the north woods, no one ever leaves. Someone's stranded. Turns out that it was one of the guys I had attended school with. I'll call him Jim. Jim gets in the car and we start talking. I hadn't seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe a little bit older. We get to town and I ask him if he wants to come to the VFW and have a drink. He says, no, just take me home. Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks away from my grandmother's house. I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the part of town that was really on the outskirts, up by the fairgrounds and the cemetery. There was a mobile home park out there. Figured that's where he lived. When we reached the end of the turn, he said, "Just drop me here. It was good to see you again." And he walks off into the night. I go to the VFW, met some of my old classmates, and we start to talk. Now, please understand, I've never done drugs, nor do I drink more than soda pop. I was stone cold sober, tired after a 13-hour flight, and it included a 3-hour layover, but sober. As we're talking about who's coming to the reunion, I mentioned that I had just picked Jim up 3 miles east of town, and he dropped him off at the fairgrounds. Everybody gets real quiet. Even the guy singing karaoke stops and lays down the mic. My cousin goes white as a new cotton shirt. "Barb, Jim died on that curve 8 years ago, rolled his car. We were all at the funeral." I start to feel really dizzy. I go out to the car, take some deep breaths, and decide whether or not I'm sane. But there on the seat is the local newspaper, printed 8 years previous, containing Jim's obituary. I still have the damn paper, and every now and then I take it out and stare at it and still wonder what happened. Ask Reddit. Till this day, when I tell people about my breathing doll, they don't believe me. They just say it was me or my vivid imagination. But my doll breathing was real, and one of the most vivid memories of my childhood, especially with unexplained experiences. I first saw the doll at a flea market. I was with my mom and my grandmother. I fell in love with it. It was a big doll about 14 inches, and the only picture I could find was this one under Famosa doll. After begging my mom to buy it and failing, my grandma bought it for me. Man, I loved that doll like it was a real baby. I bought it baby clothes, shoes, bottles, and such, and took him everywhere. I named him Rocky. People often thought I was holding my baby brother. One day I was outside playing with Rocky, and I, being a little bit too rough with him, throwing up in the air and letting him fall repeatedly, scolding him when he wouldn't sit still on my bike. So I got him and threw him as high as I could, and I tried to catch him, but he slipped through my hands and hit the ground. I picked him up to dust him off, and that's when I heard him breathing. It was heavy, angry, and fast, just like somebody would sound when they're really pissed. I'd throw him on the ground, stare at him, shaking and terrified, and I'd leave him on the ground and I'd run inside. My mom asks what's wrong, and I tell her what happened. She laughs it off as it was nothing. Says I'm being silly and to go and pick him up and bring him inside. I refused to touch him and screamed when he tried to force me, or she tried to force me to pick it up. She gave up, picked him up, looked at him and said, "See, he's just a doll stuffed in plastic. He's not real. He can't." That was the last day I ever played with dolls. Gave him to my brother for a home economics project that he had, and you can carry around a bag of flour and pretend it's a baby or do some shit. And anyway, he used its head and attached it to the bag of flour to make it more babyish. He ended up getting extra credit for that. A few years later, the whole Chucky, Crazy, the Killer doll movies were all the rage, and all the while I had a real demon doll of my own. Scary shadow while in the shower. When I was younger, probably around 10 or so, I'm a 24-year-old now, I lived with my grandparents. Their house has always been haunted, ever since they moved in 20 years ago. I've had multiple experiences at my grandparents' house over the years, but this one scared me so bad. Might not seem super scary to some of you, but at the time it terrified me. So in my grandparents' house, you walk into the kitchen. To the left, there's a long hall that leads back to the 3 bedrooms and the bathroom. The bathroom is the first door on the right, and it's quite spacious. Anyhow, literally ever since I can remember, their bathroom door has always been messed up. It doesn't close fully, but it gets stuck once you push it to the frame. It won't close all the way. You always push the door and just as hard as we can really, and just wedge it so it stays shut. If somebody opens the door, it makes a popping sound when it comes unstuck. Hope that makes sense. Sure does. One day I went into the bathroom to take a shower. The sink is in the shower next, and it has like 6 bright lights over the mirror. There's a white shower curtain, and every time somebody comes into the bathroom, and even up to the sink while you're in the shower, you can see their shadows clear as day. So I hopped into the shower. Now, next to the shower, in between the sink and the tub, my grandpa keeps a tall clothes basket. It has a lid on top. I was washing my hair when out of the corner of my eyes I saw a shadow. I turned to look fully at it, and my heart leapt into my throat. There was a shadow of an older woman with curly hair on the top of her head. It looked as if she pulled the lid off of the laundry basket and was throwing something in it. I immediately pulled open the shower curtain as fast as I could and looked around the bathroom. There wasn't anybody in there, and I know it wasn't my grandma because 1, she doesn't have short curly hair on the top of her head, or her hair is shoulder length and straight as can be. 2, if my grandma would have come into the bathroom, I would have 100% heard her come in due to the pop of the door. And even if it wasn't wedged, it still creaks and pops when opening because it's old. I didn't hear anybody come into the bathroom. 3, my grandma was on the house phone talking to her sister. I could hear her talking in the kitchen from all the way in the bathroom. Jumped out of the shower with the shampoo in my hair still, wrapped a towel around me and ran to the bathroom down the hall to my nan. She saw me running and immediately put the phone down to ask what was wrong. She could definitely tell that I was terrified. I then asked her if she came to the bathroom and put something into the laundry basket. She looked at me weirdly. She told me no, she hadn't come to the bathroom when I was in the shower at all. I then told her what I had seen, and she hurriedly hung up the phone after telling her sister bye. My nan walked back into the bathroom with me and waited in there while I finished showering, and then while I got dressed. Then we sat down in the living room while she proceeded to tell me that an old woman lived there before my grandparents bought the house. I was terrified to take showers in there by myself for weeks after that. And would have my nan basically stand in the bathroom with me until I finished. It was so scary at the time, I can still remember how my heart had leapt. The pure fear that spread through my body when I watched that shadow lift the lid of the basket up and then put it back down. I also never heard any sounds of the basket lid being put back on, and it always made a small clicking noise. Granola textured humanoids. Has anyone encountered granola-like people? I'm a 20-year-old male, and for years I've witnessed 2 granola-textured people. My first encounter is at the age of 5 when I lived in my home in Kansas. They were about 3 feet 2 inches tall, yellow eyes and skin that was textured like granola. I would wake up in the middle of the night and see these 2 things staring back at me. I would often just close my eyes really hard and turn the other way. But the countless times I'd tell my parents, they'd brush it off as a kid just being a kid. Understandable. Although, one day when I woke up after them being there the previous night, there were 2 sets of tiny handprints on the bedside that weren't human handprints, but more of 2 sets of where to put their fingerless hands. The handprints were made up of disgusting-smelling granola-textured substance. My parents, baffled by it, brushed it off as me having a midnight snack. These encounters happened for an entire 3 years I lived in Kansas. Now I've lived in several other states where I continue to encounter these things. Now I understand as a child we're impressionable to certain things, but I know I physically saw these things and continued to see them well into my teen years. I've encountered them in other states that I've lived, but this post would be an essay if I listed all of them. Has anybody encountered anything similar? I've yet to find a similar case to this, and I'd be interested to hear from the community. Granola people. I realized I lived in a haunted house. These are my experiences. I Hi everyone, my name is Will. Before I get into this post, I want to let you know that I was never a believer of the paranormal. I thought it was interesting, ghosts, fate, shit like that. Now that I'm older, I want to tell you guys some stories about what happened at my old house. I moved to Essex in the United Kingdom in 2008. The house we moved into prior to this is an old family. The house we moved into prior to this, an old family had lived in. They were in their 70s or 80s. The mother was in her 80s and the room was full of dolls. Annabelle-like dolls, and every time I looked at them, it was just so eerie. I could feel a creepy atmosphere every time I walked in there. Fast forward to 2008. June, July, we moved in. All settled, and I remember in 2008 I used to have like a Sky broadband. I would watch Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventures with my brother. I was very curious. I'm not entirely sure what made me do it, but around 8:48 p.m. that night, I went into the toilet and I said, "If there's any ghosts here, make a noise." Straight after that, there was a loud bang on the window. I ran straight into my mother's room, just telling her what happened. This was a minor incident. I eventually shrugged it off, but my suspicion grew after many occasions. When I was alone in the house, I did not think I was alone. I did not feel I was alone. And as I'm writing this now, I have goosebumps and chills around my body because I can remember being alone in that house, and it felt like I was being watched. I felt as if I was with somebody else, and there'd be nights where I'm PC gaming, playing Team Fortress 2 at the age of 10 or 11, and it would be me upstairs gaming, my mother downstairs. There'd be a huge banging on the wall. It'd be dead silent, and then a repetition of bangs right on the wall, and my mom would shout at me, telling me to stop making noise and banging on the wall. I was paralyzed with fear. I shouted back, saying I did not make the noise. I was so fucking scared because we both heard it, and there's no explanation about it. And this happened frequently, and each time it was just as scary as the first time I've heard it. Experience 3. Scariest experience I've ever had. Can't explain it. I can never explain it. I just can't believe that I can still feel the same fear now as I did that night. I was home alone in my TV room, was pointed toward the bed. The window was above my bed, and I'm a British-born Vietnamese Chinese at 11 or 12, and I would play my Nintendo DS playing Pokemon under the covers. So picture this, okay? It's a pitch blackness, and you're playing Pokemon, and you're alone in your room. As I'm playing Pokemon, suddenly I hear a loud, screeching, growling noise, as if something came out of the TV and is on the bed making this noise. I remember everything exactly. It was like a huge scratching noise, followed by screeching and growling. And no, it was not my Pokemon, because I play my DS at night with no sound. I was so scared I dropped my DS down my bed, hid under the blankets, and just passed out. I didn't want to wake up. I was so fucking scared. I did anything I could do just to go to sleep. At that point, I didn't want to open my eyes. I didn't want to do anything. I laid perfectly still, eyes shut, and pretended that I didn't exist. I want to also add that when I go into sleep paralysis, I feel like I'm being possessed. My body shakes up and down, and it feels like somebody's pulling my chest out of my bed. It's a very unusual feeling, and I'm not sure if anybody else can relate. This wasn't a sleep paralysis episode because I was playing Pokemon. Experience 4. Dreaming the future. My father and I were home alone in the house, and we fell asleep. This event is something I cannot explain at all. I don't know what it is, and he doesn't know how it happened, but we both dreamt the same thing. My father is a Vietnamese interpreter. He translates for Vietnamese people. He worked for a company, and in his dream he dreamt that he got a call from the company to book him into an appointment with the police to do a translating job. We wake up 30 minutes later and he receives a phone call for that exact same appointment. We both had no fucking idea what just happened. I remember that day so clearly. My dad starting praying with the Buddhist cards and burning incense after that. I think it's also important that I should add that my mom, who is Vietnamese born, kept having nightmares every night about a man who loves her, but is dead and haunts her dreams until this day. It got so bad that we had to buy dream catchers to help my mom. My friend gave me Islamic beads. We invited a feng shui master to help us out. After all these experiences, I started to believe that there is something out there that we don't know and we cannot explain. Deceased relative visited my father. Just some context. My family is Chinese and Vietnamese. We escaped to Vietnam after the Chinese communists took over, and then went to the UK after the Vietnam War. In '91, my father was working in a restaurant where a fortune teller / clairvoyant came in and visited him. She told him some stuff that really blew his mind. So, she said to him that my grandfather sitting beside him. My father felt chills run up his spine, but was a bit skeptical. Mind you, it's not something you hear every day. So she said that his grandfather is dressed up in military attire or soldier. This is correct. My great-grandfather was a major general. My father didn't believe her until she told him his Chinese name. We're from a place called Chaozhou, and we speak Teochew dialect, so it's not only did she say his name, she said it in a language only a small population would know, and she's not Chinese. She wrote his name down. Secondly, she described the way he died, executed in a river in China by the communists, which is true because a neighbor told us this in Vietnam. My father didn't ask for any details, but has anybody ever had an experience like this? Giant black dog. Let me preface this by saying I'm not really a skeptic, but I look for the logical reason on everything first and foremost. And frankly, I think 99% of the paranormal stuff has a logical or scientific explanation. But here's my thing. Lately I've been noticing glimpses of what I can only describe as a large black dog. So far, I've never been able to see the entire thing. The frustrating thing is that it's always something I think I can explain away logically, but I find it strange it's always a dog. So if you guys that are into this have an explanation, I'd love to hear your thoughts. It started a month ago and I was closing alone at work. It's a two-people job, but somebody was sick, so I was exhausted. And as I was washing dishes from the very corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of something black. It was like the top of a dog going from the shoulders down to the tail, but I didn't see the head nor legs. Counter-blocked it. I walked behind a wall, so I quickly lost sight of it. Less than a second. I double-checked, but of course nothing. Second time it happened once again. I was closing alone, and I was in the same spot, the sink. It was around the same area. Mind you, I was even more exhausted this time and sleep-deprived. But this time I caught a glimpse of its entire topside, as I saw it downward facing the ear, except this time I saw it walk by the stool and heard the stool move. Didn't see it move. This one's even more frustrating because I checked the stool was out of place, but I couldn't have just forgotten to put it back in place after a customer sat. I only heard it move, but I didn't see it. Normally, with just 2 instances, I wouldn't care less, but last night I woke in the middle of the night to a singular loud bark. Once again, this can be explained as me being in the middle of a dream, nothing really supernatural, but to me this all sounds like exhaustion, especially as I've been very, very stressed lately in life. However, the only peculiar thing to me is that it's always a dog, and to the believers, is there anything related to dogs and the supernatural? I always hear stuff about ghosts being like humans, not animals. And to the skeptic, can hallucinations be consistent? I tried looking up dog hauntings, but all I got was stuff about Dogman, which I think is more like a cryptic or a skinwalker or something. I don't know, but I'd appreciate insight on this. I'd rather just know rather than it me, being in limbo. And now I return to limbo. See you tomorrow.